Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. We're on volume 22 of Ace of the Diamond, and so I should just stop making predictions. I really should, because last volume I was like, oh, Yukushi's gonna win. And then Terajima was like, no, you're wrong. And so I was like, yep, nope, it's Ichidai Third advances on and Yukushi's out. And now we're at Norikane at this game, and so far things are going all right. Things are going good. We're gonna try out the numbers. We're up like 6-0 with Sato because of Shirasu being a badass, and so I'm like, yes, please. And so everything, I'm like, I get worried at this point because I'm like, Terajima has conditioned me watching this series that whenever you get comfortable, things don't usually go your way. Last volume was case in point, but maybe Terajima surprising all of us by having Yukushi losing was the price we had to pay for things to go well for Sawamura in this volume. He's like, you're gonna suffer, but I'm gonna make it okay with Sawamura. At least I'm hoping so. You all can't see the cover page of chapter 193 yet, but it's Miyuki and Furuya standing with Sawamura alongside Haruichi and Kuromochi. So like Sawamura's got a support circle there. Yay. So yeah, so there's that. But yeah, so we're gonna be covering chapters 193 to 201. That's going to be the chapters that we're covering. Slowly but surely catching up. Slowly but surely. But yeah, doing those chapters today and going over for volume 22. And I've got my paper here. I'll probably need more when I take more notes, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But yeah, it's scorching hot outside. The heat index is like 108 today. It's just ridiculously hot. And so I was like, well, it's time to watch Ace of the Diamond. I'm glad I'm not out playing baseball in this heat, but I will gladly read about baseball in this heat. So we'll do that anyway. So I don't know. I'm curious. I think at this point, my prediction is Sato's going to make it to the finals. But knowing Terajima, it's not going to be an easy route. There's going to be angst. I don't like it, but as long as there's a happy ending, I'm all right. But last volume we had angst, but it did not have a happy ending for Yukushi. So what do you want me to do with that, Terajima? So in any case, I am curious to see what all we get into in this volume. I just want Sawamura to not get... He had such a bad first game, and everybody's like, no, you got this. And I'm like, I just want him to do well and work his way back up. And I know he will. It's just, God, Terajima makes you suffer for these good Sawamura moments. You suffer for them. I'm like, how dare you, sir? So hopefully everything will go all right. Fingers crossed. We shall see. But we're going to start volume 22 of Ace of the Diamond Act 2. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Oh, I took a lot of notes, like front and back on all these. I took so many notes. Oh my gosh. What a lot to happen in a volume. I was very satisfied with this volume. I was like, okay, Terajima, all right, good on ya. We'll talk about the whole thing with Inashiro at the very end. We'll talk about all that, but some interesting developments in this volume, chapters 193 to 201. Interesting developments. We're seeing a lot of old faces, some for a very short time. But man, seeing Seiko again was interesting. I forgot about Seiko, honestly. I forgot about Ogawa, and I was like, oh, you're on this team. Because I remember Nagata, and I'm like, I remember Nagata as being this big power batter. It's funny that Seiko, who was such a threat early on to Sato, like Mei mops the floor with him, just like, bam, done. We'll talk about Itsuki too. There's lots of interesting little setups in here that I'm like, huh, okay, interesting. But okay, so there's so much to talk about. I literally have like 2.5 pages of notes of just what was going on. When I would stop the chapter, I think this whole video of my recording was like so long because I'm like just sitting there like just going along and talking. But it was just funny because these chapters went by really quickly, but so much happened in between them. I was like, oh my gosh. So yeah, let's talk about this. So we established, so Koshu, we've talked about this in the comments and in the Discord, but Koshu is a lot like Chris. He's like a younger, uninjured Chris that has Miyuki as a senpai, which is kind of hilarious, right? Because it's like, what would Chris be like if Miyuki was the upperclassman and Chris was the underclassman and Chris didn't get injured? This is Koshu's kind of an answer to that, but Koshu is different than Chris, but he has that same aura about him, and I think that's why him and Sawamura get along so well, because there's that like Chris-like aura, and Sawamura loves Chris, like that's his mentor, and so I feel like Koshu gets along great with him because they have similar personalities, right? But Koshu makes note that the numbers are not consistent. They're not quite there yet. And depending on, like, the chapter's called Today's Numbers. So how are the numbers today? And during Norikane, number 7 and number 11, they're hitting the marks. They're doing great. And I'm like, But I think I'm so glad, we'll get to it and talk about it, but I'm so glad Sawamura got to go see May and the others pitch to realize what needs to be done. I'm like, yes. We'll talk about it. But yeah, so the advisor is, so let's talk about, I'm trying to, my notes are god-awful to read because I was writing so fast. But Urabe, I feel for Urabe. I do. He's not got like the tear-jerking backstory that Kawabata has, but I do feel for him. You know who he reminds me of? If you've ever watched Haikyuu, he's Inoshida. He reminds me of Chikara Inoshida, who was the second year in Haikyuu that quit the team. And I like that we get little, because I questioned the last volume, I'm like, why was he at Taito for 2 weeks? Like, what was the tea? Well, the tea was, one, his advisor convinced him to go to Taito. It wasn't Urabe personally wanting to go and being inspired by Taito. His advisor told him to go. So I was like, so he didn't really have a say in it. He was just going because it was recommended to him. So there's that. But also, he just didn't gel, and he got discouraged and felt like there was no way he was going to move up in the world on that team. And so he quit. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is that it's sort of a Nabe situation, where Nabe and some of the others at the time, like when they were considering quitting, they were like, well, we're just not going to get anywhere. We're just not as good as the other roster. And rather than stick it out with the team, he spent 2 weeks there and was like, this ain't working, and he quit. And I actually appreciate that Terajima gave his situation a positive spin. Because normally, like in Inoshida's case, Inoshida quitting, it's not necessarily viewed as negative, but the positive, the outcome that's positive for Inoshida and Haikyuu is that he decides to go back. He basically goes through the same problem that Urabe did, where he quits the team, and it's really sad, but they described that he's like, well, I was only 2 weeks in, I hadn't made friends with anybody, so it was easy for me to quit without regrets. It's like I hadn't bonded with anybody, so I could just quit, and I didn't feel anything. But what he misses is baseball, and in Haikyuu, what Inoshida misses is volleyball. And so they both go through the same motions where they both miss the sport. They don't necessarily miss the people involved, because in Inoshida's case, he still sees the people, but they both miss the sport itself. And in Inoshida's case, he goes back to the team. He goes back to Karasuno and gets back on the team and works even harder. But again, Haikyuu is different than Ace of the Diamond, because Haikyuu, there's not that many players on their volleyball team. So Inoshida goes back to the team and gets a spot on the roster, right? In Urabe's case, he's like, no, it just wasn't working. And so it would be very easy for Terajima to give a character like Urabe, just he quit baseball and just that was a cowardly thing to do, and that's the end story. But no, Terajima treats this very realistically and says, people quit all the time from teams for various reasons. It's not a good fit. And for him, he's like, no, Urabe made the choice of, rather than stick out a situation that he knew was going to make him miserable, he quit, but then realized he still loved baseball. And I love him training under the bridge. It reminded me of Yakushi. It reminded me of Raichi and them training under the bridge with the bats, like it's Urabe with the pitching and just pitching against the wall. It had a very Shoyo Hinata feel of him just like practicing against the wall by himself because he doesn't have a team to practice with. And then he gets on the internet looking up all these training videos and finds this article about Norikane's team. And was like, that seems like it could be a fit for me. And I love that his family's supportive of him. His family don't get mad at him for quitting Taito. They're just happy that he found a way to go back to baseball, because I'm sure they realize, like, all his practices by himself, that that's what he likes. And I'm like, that's so good that they supported him, and that his coach that suggested Taito wasn't mad that he quit and went to another team. He was just happy he found baseball and continued with it. Because that's the thing Urabe says. He's like, I spent 6 years playing the sport. I don't want to give up all that time from elementary school and middle school up now. I'm not burnt out. He's not burnt out. It just wasn't a fit. He felt like he wanted to play so badly, and being on Tato, he wasn't going to get that opportunity. And so joining Norikani gave him that moment. It's like, wow, it's crazy, right? It's crazy. So I like that the internet does something positive. Terujima's like, because a lot of mangakas, especially if they're like my age, are probably like, that internet. And he's just like, no, this actually was a benefit. It allowed him to find his niche where he fit in at. But yeah, and everyone being there to support him, it's so good. But then Terujima's like, that's great. Now Sawamura is going to be the crusher of dreams. But here's the thing. This is what I love about Sawamura in this volume. He is not Mei. Sawamura, we've talked about it over and over in this series, how he's not Mei. Definitely not, because Sawamura, Mei on the mound would have been like, it's time to crush your hopes and dreams, and does so with like Akira and the Arakawa and that team. He's like, gonna crush your hopes and dreams and stomp them into the ground because I'm just that pitcher. Sawamura, he's empathetic. He looks at Urabe and he's like, I so know that feeling that you're feeling when your team's down and you're up on the mound and you're up at bat and you're trying everything you can do to save your team. He's like, I know exactly what you feel like. But he's like, and for a second I thought Sawamura was going to let his emotions get the better of him and Urabe was going to take advantage of it, but he's like, I know what that feels like and I can relate so much to you, but we've worked just as hard and I'm not going to lose because of you. And he just shuts him down. And it's like, damn. But yeah, but Sawamura being able to be empathetic, and Sawamura's like, I'm not here to crush your dreams, but I'm here to help my team and do my job. And so I can't let you score. Sorry. It's like almost worse, right? It's so good. I love these moments with Sawamura in this volume. And I love Asada doing like the number 11 pose with Sato and Ikuki, Kosei, I'm calling him Kuki now because it's stuck now. Thank you all. Thanks, Ace of the Diamond. I'm calling a character Kuki. But yeah, the 11 pose. I love that they do the 11 pose. It's so cute. It's adorable. But yeah. And then Miyuki talking about taking advantage of their strategy. He's looking at the coach for Norikane being like, you're no Kunitomo. You're no coach from these previous teams. You're no Sakaki. You're no Sasaki. He's like, nah. Your strategy's way too on the nose, and I figured it out too easily. Like, Miyuki's like 5 steps ahead of him in chess. He's already figured out how to do checkmate. And I love that they describe it as a devilish play. I'm like, no, Miyuki and Sawamura as a battery, they are aggressive, and they are devilish little gremlins. That's their battery, and it's just bottom of the second, and it's 0-6. And then it becomes 0-7. When Urabe, he gets out after that, and Miura, number 12, comes in, who they suspect is the true ace. The teams that don't let their ace play and let these like number 12 people play and say they're the true ace, I'm like, how does that even work? Like, what? Like, why don't you let your ace, why don't you give Miura the number 1 if he's not the true ace? How does that work? What? Is the real ace injured? I didn't understand. And so then with 8, they make the score 8-0, and the pressure comes off of Sawamura. So the team recognizing in the last volume that Sawamura is still stiff, he's not had a lot of sleep, he's still exhausted. They're like, we scored all the runs so that we took the pressure off of you. And it's like, that's one way to do it, right? But I love that at the moment Miyuki was telling Sawamura, he's like, it's okay if we concede 2 or 3 runs. I was having like Yakushi PTSD flashbacks being like, don't you say that. No. I was like thinking of Tomobe being like, we're not conceding any runs. And Sawamura says the same thing Tomobe did. He's like, I'm not conceding any runs. No. No. So I feel like Tomobe for Yakushi may be a bit similar to Sawamura with his ideals. I like that. I like that little connection there. He's like, I don't want to concede any runs, even. And he acknowledges to Miyuki what him and Miyuki are both thinking the same thing. He's like, even though we're up to 8-0, we can't rely on that. Like Yakushi, again, Yakushi's mistakes, right? Yakushi made the mistake of thinking against Ichidai Third that they could just concede a few runs. It's no big deal. And it ended up stressing them out and they lost. I mean, it wasn't the only factor, but it was a big part of it. But then also, even during the summer tournament, Raizo, Todoroki, he saw they were up by like 11 runs and they were like, well, we'll just send in, game's over, we'll just send in the crew. And then the other team got their momentum back against their first years and they ended up winning. So Sawamura and Miyuki are like, we have learned from Yakushi's mistakes. And they're like, even though we've not seen those games, and we know that these batters are good enough, they have that crazy swing. If they get momentum and start connecting, it's over, even though we have such a big lead. So we're in the 4th inning. We don't want them connecting to become trouble. And I love in that chapter that everybody, like, Sawamura's like on a roll. He's doing good. He's overexerting himself, as Kataoka says. And everybody's like, oh, is this Sawamura's full power? And all we get, it's the tiniest thing. But Miyuki goes, no, not yet. I'm like, oh, yes. I was like, yes, yes. I feel like Sawamura is entering the next stage. Like we are witnessing our sunshine boy take like some major leaps in these chapters of growth. Like him with the Norikane game, him watching Seiko versus Inashiro, and now watching Ichidai versus Sensen. Like, our boy is watching the best teams in the high school qualifier competing and is getting a taste of what he could be as an ace. And I'm like, oh, it's so glorious. I can't wait to talk about it with you all, but we'll get there. We'll get there. So yeah, but that not yet. And then Nori, I love Nori's faith in Sawamura in that moment. Nori's like, hey, Koshu, let's go back. Sawamura doesn't need us anymore. I'm like, yes. I was like, yes, Nori, that's right. I love it. So Sosei's watching, and their pitcher, Narakoji. He's the one they're going to be facing against Furuya. So that's going to be interesting. But then we get Hinata from Norikane, his backstory about him being, what does it say, about him like not being able to hit a home run, and he tried all that time, and he finally hit a home run, and he wants to chase what that feeling's like, and it's like, wow, what an inspirational moment. And Terajima's like, out. It's like, damn. Terajima's a monster. He is so brutal. He does not care about your inspirational messages. He's like, nope, denied. And it's just like just the guillotine goes down, right? So, but Sawamura, he starts to get into his head, like with the emotion of everything. He starts to slip up a little bit. And I was like, oh, don't. I was like, oh, Sawamura, you're doing so well. Don't slip up now. But then, you know, Norikane, they don't want to give up. But Miyuki and Sawamura, their battery, like, even though they don't communicate out loud as well as like him and Koshu do, Sawamura and Miyuki get on like a telepathic wavelength, and they start finishing each other's sentences and thinking the same thing, right? Where they start talking about like what they need to do to get these batters out and what will happen if they don't. Like they're like a telepathic link between them. I'm like, oh my God. Like if Koshu and him ever get on that level, it's going to be scary. But yeah, Norikane talks about how it's funny that we book in this volume. You have Norikane talking about being simple, being a strength. And then at the very end of this volume, you have Ichidai Third talking about simple is best. So you have two teams talking about just go back to the basics. In Norikane's case, they're like, we've had so much data at our disposal, we can go through the basics. The problem is their opponent was Sato, and Sato was just better. With Ichidai Third, their thing is simple as best. And I think that they will have the advantage over Sensen by the end of it. But I could be wrong. We saw a team with the whole simple as best motto lose. Ichidai Third may lose in this and not advance to the semifinals. But let's be real. Let's be real for a hot second. I know with Yakushi and Ichidai Third, either team could advance to the semifinals, and I would have found it believable and been like, okay, who could Sato face in the semifinals? They could face Yakushi. That would be an awesome game. Raichi and Sonata and maybe Furuya connecting, because there was that conversation at the start of Act 2 when they all met up again after Sawamura became the ace, or towards the end of Act 2 rather. I'm like, I could have believed it. Ichidai Third can totally believe they're going to make it to the Sims. The whole thing with Amahisa and Sawamura building up to them facing off against one another, totally viable. But Sensen, Maki, Tamba ain't there, so I just don't see Sensen winning. I don't see Sensen being a compelling semifinal before Inashiro. We know it's going to be Inashiro, let's be real. So I just don't know. I don't foresee Sensen winning this game against Ichidai Third. They might put up a really good fight which it's looking like it's only 3-2, so it's a pretty good game so far. But I don't see Sensen winning. I don't see Maki winning. The coach for Ichidai Third is just so damn good. He's gonna go on. It's like Terajima. But then, I can't say that because Terajima's like favorite of the team is Yukushi, and he made them kick the bucket, so... He just knew Raichi would be too much against Kosei. He just knew. Or wait, no. He just knew Raichi would be too much against Sawamura. Or maybe not. I don't know. I'm still a little bitter about it. But anyway. So they have this whole thing about being simple and going through the data. And Sawamura, I love this. Him going back. Sawamura, again, our sunshine boy. A lot of people give Sawamura discredit because they say he's really loud and dumb. No, Sawamura is not dumb. He's just really loud. He's just really loud. But he's not dumb. Because even as he's on the mound here, he's thinking about, he's like, I don't want to cede any runs. Is that my ego talking? Is that me being selfish? I love that Sawamura is basically going through the crises that Mei went through, only he's doing it on the mound in the middle of a game instead of after Kunitomo yells at him. So... it's kind of mind-blowing that Sawamura is having this moment of self-reflection going, me not wanting to concede any runs. Is it because I'm being selfish and I'm wanting to put myself as, the reason why we win? And then he's like, no, that's not it. He's like, I'm choosing to bear this burden myself. No one has chosen it for me. I chose to want to follow this path to become the ace. I chose to take on this pressure. I chose to put this number on my back and to be an anchor for my team. I made these decisions. He's like, and so now all I can do, since I've made this choice, is live up to the title I've been given. I need to perform my duty and know my role. And that's all I can do. And my role is to not let them hit the ball and have any runs. That's all there is to it. I love how simple that is. It's so simple, but it's so perfect. I'm like, yeah, that's... like, you just went through a whole crisis in your head in the span of one batter, Sawamura. It would take a normal character for a sports anime like 3 episodes to get to that conclusion. You did it in the span of 2 panels. Sweet. So that was, and I love at the end of that chapter, at the end of chapter 195, we have them saying, like, in the little thing, it's like Sawamura entering the next stage. And I'm like, yes, this volume is all about Sawamura advancing to the next stage of his development as an ace. And I'm like, yes. Yes, please. So chapter 196, Alive and Well, had a different meaning than what I thought it had. So going into this chapter, Sawamura is about to get into the 5th inning, and the announcers are all about Sawamura. They're like, his superb pitching. I'm like, it feels pretty damn good to hear some good things about Sawamura from the announcer stand. It does. And nobody's questioning his pitching. I mean, we'll talk about Kataoka after the game, but nobody's questioning it. Furuya does the fist. I'm like, yes, Furuya, God, bless his character. We'll talk about him. And Kataoka gets on to him, but it's more like advice. Kataoka's like, hey, snap out of it. You're doing too much. Calm it down. But he's like, at the end of the game, he's like, you're doing good. You're doing what you need to do. We want to end this game quickly so that you can rest. Like for Sawamura to be doing this well, going off of no sleep, is pretty great in itself. But I like that Kataoka's got that tough love. He's like, I'm going to be stern and honest with you, but I'm also going to support you. And he has that little hand on his shoulder. It's like, so good. And he's like, keep it up until the end. Meaning, like, I'm not subbing you out. Kataoka's like, I'm not taking you out of the game. You're going to pitch all these innings. Let's wrap it up, shall we? It's like, I love it. And then that smile that Miyuki gives in that moment, like that Miyuki smile is him saying, like, Sawamura, Kataoka's acknowledging you. Did you see that? And I'm like, Sawamura can't see when you acknowledge him 5 times out of 10. Why would you expect him to see Kataoka, right? So they get a double. It gives them, or no, Yui comes up to bat. I don't want to skip over him. He's like the big part of this chapter. Yui comes up to bat as the pinch hitter, right? And so the bases are loaded. It's like the most perfect and yet stressful situation I can imagine, is that on the one hand, bases are loaded. So if you get a good hit, people are going to score. But on the other side, if you get out while bases are loaded, that sucks. So Yui has some pressure, but Yui acknowledges, he's like, Kataoka, he's like, Coach Kataoka acknowledged that I could do this. He's like, so I know I can, and I have to. It's like, yes. It's like, yes, I love it so much. I'm like, So Yui comes up. He does the whole spiel about working hard, about he's memorized the batter, about memorized the pitcher. I love that. He's like, I've already got this guy memorized. I know exactly what he's going to throw. I just need to trust in myself and then just hit when I can contact. And it's like, oh. And he gets the double. And then the game is now 11-0. And it's like, Yui, my boy, I freaking love it. And I love, see, when it said Alive and Well as the chapter title, I thought that it meant like Yui was alive and well as a player. Because Yui struggled this, like, Act 2. Yui has struggled to find his place. And he's gone from being, like, someone that aspired to be, like, the main catcher to accepting that that may not happen and trying to, like, hone his skills in other areas so that he can be useful for the team. And he's come to realize he's a good hitter. And so I feel like in this moment, he's like, I'm just going to do whatever I can to help the team. And then in the stands, in the audience, you hear them be like, wow, he's going to be a slugger. He's only a first year. He's got such a future ahead of him. And I'm like, as a batter, I'm like, that's kind of crazy, right? But at that moment, Sawamura, he's like, slugging is alive and well in Saito. And I'm like, that's what the chapter's named after. And it's so funny because, you know, we spent all of season one having really good hitters, but our pitching was weak. And then we spent all of season 2 saying, okay, we've got our pitching now, but our batting's weak because we lost our third years. And now Terajima's like, okay, Act 2, we finally slowly but surely built up to having a good set of pitchers and good batters. We're like at our optimal where we can be, right? Even though there's still so much room for them to grow still yet. There's still so much room to grow. And I have a feeling that the rest of this series, the rest of Act 2, is going to keep showing them building up and building up and building up until they face Inashiro in the finals. That's where I think it's going. I'm like, no, you've built up May too much. As much as I'd love to see Kosei versus May, I just, in the back of my head, I'm like, it's going to be Inashiro versus Saito. It's the rematch of all time. And it's them at their best. So we'll see. We'll see if it happens. I could be wrong. I was wrong about Yakushi, so could be wrong. But any case, I love Masashi. I love the reactions. Like, that one guy, I guess it might have been Ono seeing Yui, but then Yui's talking to Ono later about it, so I guess he wasn't there. But I love that you have, like, Masashi on fire from Yui because Masashi had been kicked out of the game, right? So he has all this energy, and then Koshu's just quietly, like, contemplatively looking, like, okay, maybe Yui will probably still be competition for him as a catcher, but he's also found another area that he's good at. So I'm like, okay, we'll go from there. And then Sawamura yelling victoriously. It's great. And then I love Sawamura after he's like, our slugging is alive and well in Saito, and it shows him doing the squeeze bunt. Like, that page, that transition for him, like, screaming about their slugging to him squeeze bunting is, like, one of the funniest damn things. It's so good. That was great. I loved it. And Nabe being happy in the stands, Nabe just being like, our boys are doing it, and it's 13-0. 13-0. And at this point, the third years come in, which I thought was really cool. And I loved how Kataoka and them phrased it. They phrased it by saying Sawamura's pitching, as well as the batting, allowed it to be able for the third years to come in and play in those last innings. It's like they got to come out and play a game. And so the third years, I love Higisa and Sawamura being like, shoo, 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 and the manager is in the back going, shoo. I was like, I love that the manager is now on board with both Nori and Sawamura. I'm like, I love it. I love that he's on board with both of them now. And it's so good. But of course, Ochiai. Ochiai has been quiet this whole game. I was just waiting. I was like, Ochiai will complain about something. And he does! He does! Ochiai just can't let it go. He has to be the naysayer. He has to be, which Kataoka, they acknowledged that Sawamura was not pitching well in this game, which he wasn't. He was doing better, but not good enough. Not good enough to face up against Ichidai or Inashiro. We'll talk about that when we get closer to it. But it's curious, Ochiai, he's wanted Yui to get more experience, which makes sense, and we're seeing the fruits of that being bloomed. But he also wants Okamura to get more experience. He wants Koshu to get in there. And I don't think it's because he dislikes Miyuki, but I think it's because, you know, he realizes Ochiai is not nostalgic, right? Ochiai is not nostalgic. Kataoka is very nostalgic. Kataoka, whether he wants to admit it or not, ties a lot to his past. whenever Sakaki said that Sawamura was like him when he was a pitcher, Kataoka was like, it's just that revelation. And so he kind of is very nostalgic. Ochiai is not nostalgic at all. So Ochiai is like, hey, I know Miyuki and him are a good battery, but Ochiai is thinking of the future. He's playing catcher. He's thinking of the plays for the future. And he's suggesting, he's like, look, Koshu and Sawamura, whether we like it or not, Miyuki's going to graduate after this year, and Koshu and Sawamura are probably going to be one of our main batteries. Shouldn't we let Koshu practice with Sawamura a bit? Shouldn't we put him in to get some game experience? Maybe. But here's the thing. When we get down to it. Kataoka realized, he's like, Sawamura is not doing the best that he could. And we don't want to get in a situation where we mess up the dynamic. Sawamura and Miyuki were on the same page in this match. They were gelling really well. They had a really good battery. Why would we mess that up now? Let's not do that. We'll bring Koshu in for something else, but let's keep them together. So I thought that was interesting. And so chapter 197, To the Top. I got such Haikyuu vibes. I was thinking Haikyuu, and they have the picture of the stairs going up into the stands. I'm like, oh, how fitting. It's perfect. But yeah, they beat Norikane. They kept Miyuki in for the battery. They beat Norikane 13-0. And they advanced to the quarterfinals. And so they'd replaced the third U fielders. Miyuki stayed in. I think Kataoka wanted just to make sure that he was playing it a little safe. Kataoka just wanted to make sure that Sawamura could finish the game off. And him and Miyuki were gelling so well, he didn't want to mess with it. But yeah, Norikane, it's sad. At this point, every team that loses is going to cry because it's a lot of third years, and we're highlighting that since it's Act 2 and it's the third year for our main characters for some of them. So they're sad that they lost, but I like that the coach was like, look, we faced a nationals qualifying caliber squad. We were up against a pretty good opponent. And I'm like, okay. I was like, that's pretty cool that the coach admits all that. I thought that was pretty good. But speaking of which, so Kataoka, about Sawamura, he does not hold punches to the reporters. He's like, he was over the top. He was exerting too much energy during his first game. He didn't have a good performance. And the one reporter's like, man, you are hard on Sawamura. And he's like, it's because I know he's capable of so much more. He's like, I know he's going to take whatever criticism I give him and connect it to the future. I was like, he knows that it's valuable for Sawamura to get experience and to have these bad games so that he can go into a future game with that knowledge and get better. Sawamura is definitely, like Ochiai said, someone that strives against adversity. So if he has a bad game, he learns from it and he gets better, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? And he knows the stakes. So he believes that he'll connect to the future. We see Sawamura, and it's black in the manga, although I think it's probably dark blue to match the Seiko colors. Sawamura looks pretty good in the dark shirt. I'm not gonna lie. But then, yeah, Furuya coming up and saying nice pitching and having the water bottle. Furuya being so sweet and courteous to him. And I love Sawamura being like, I connected it. And he's like, yeah, because they know that they're helping each other pitch. They formed like the best rivalry. Again, I think that if it comes down to Inashiro facing Sato, that's going to be a big deal with it, because it's going to be such a nice parallel to back in season 1 when you had Sawamura and Furuya that were against each other. They were arguing with each other. Tamba didn't really care about either one of them. Kawakami wasn't confident in himself. They had a pitcher relay, but it wasn't great. Now you have Kaneda, you have Nori, you have Furuya and Sawamura, and Furuya and Sawamura are like on the same wavelength, like so close as friends now and rivals. And Nori is so much more confident and able to like be a mentor figure and to give a voice to the pitchers there. And Kaneda is great too. So it's like, it's a total reversal from where they were in season 1. I'm like, I'm so ready if they face Inashiro for that relay to come into play. I'm like, yes. As long as Sawamura gets to close it out. We'll see. But yeah, so he has the water bottle. So we have Sosei versus Kawa. Sosei has the 2-seamer. So it's passed down from generation to generation. So it's a special pitch that all the pitchers of Sosei learn when they go there. I'm like, that's pretty cool. I like the idea of passing down a pitch, right? And they're famous for defense and good pitching. So they're going to be a pretty good matchup against Sato, because Sato's got a good offense. So they're going to match them up with their defense, so it's going to come down to the pitching, right? All right, so it may give... So it'll be interesting to see how Furuya handles it. Furuya looked fired up, though. When he said, when Kataoka said that Furuya was going to pitch, he looked fired up. So it was like, all right, good. And Nara Koji is the main pitcher. And we saw him back earlier, I believe. Or we'll talk about him again later. But Nara is the pitcher. And so I like that Kanemaru turns around when they're all like watching Sosei play, and he turns around and he's like, which is kind of funny because Sawamura ended up not pitching for Sosei's game, so it didn't matter if he fell asleep. He wasn't going to pitch for it anyway. It's funny how that works out. But I love that Kanemaru is like, he's like, oh, come on, Sawamura, why are you asleep? And Miyuki's like, shh, let him sleep. I love that Miyuki defends Sawamura. Of course, Miyuki defends Sawamura when he's not even awake to hear it. It's like, of course he does. But he's like, hey, he's not been sleeping well as of late. And everybody's like, what? How do you know this, Miyuki? And Miyuki's like, well, I just talk to him, you know. But he's like, he's not been sleeping. He's passed out. And of course, for all you Muramura shippers, Koshu is, of course, right by Sawamura's side like a damn dog. Like a wolf boy. He's at Sawamura's side like a loyal wolf. I love it. It's so sweet. But yeah, Sosei won. They're going to face Sato next. Sawamura's little cat face, Sawamura's expressions the whole time he wanted to learn the two-seamer, like he kind of like has that look on his face like a two-seamer. Oh, and you know, you can just see it coming. You can just see the look coming, and he's like, I wonder if it's, you know, maybe I could learn that pitch. Miyuki's like, you're not learning a new pitch right before a game, and he's like, but come on. I love that everybody gives him a hard time. They give him a hard time for sleeping, and Miyuki's like, no, we're not learning a new pitch. You're not pitching anymore tonight. And so the expressions he makes in that part of the chapter were so good. Just him being like, come on, guys. And then be like, no. So Furuya's going to start the quarterfinal game. And then he's like, Kawakami and Kaneda will be in the bullpen. He doesn't mention Sawamura. And you see for a second Sawamura clenching his fist, being like, but then being like, don't be selfish. Know your role. But it's here to help out the team. So if Kataoka doesn't want you to pitch, it's fine. Like, I love Sawamura just being in control and Koshu looking at him. I love that Koshu notices, right? Because he watches Sawamura intently, right? Because he wants to be the best battery ever. He's our sweet wolf boy. And so, I'll be honest, when Kataoka called him and Koshu to the coach's room, I was worried. I was like, what we doing? I thought he was going to, like, get on to Sawamura about his pitching. And I thought that Koshu was going to be like, I thought they were going to like tell him he was going to catch in the next game for Furuya or something. I did not expect what they said about the games to happen. Not at all. But meanwhile, before we get to that point, Masashi, he has too much energy saved up from the game not playing. So he's like, I want to go to the batting cages with you guys. And Masashi's so blunt. I feel it helps the third years having known Yuki, knowing Tetsu, Masashi's older brother. I think that helps. Because they're kind of like, oh, it's Tetsu's younger brother. He's all right. I think that helps them knowing him for them to be totally like okay with how he is in those moments. I think that helps. And so, but yeah, in any case, Masashi has too much energy, so he goes to batting cages. Seki has like the little oval face. I love that he takes like the pitching machine and he's like, come on guys, you want to be able to pitch to Mei and Kosei, don't you? Let's get some crazy pitches. And they're like, stop it. He's like, if you can hit these, you can hit anything. So I give Seki, like what was Seki's, like Seki's special pitch or something. I give Seki props for trying to challenge our boys, even though they're like, come on, quit messing around, right? Yui talks to Ono. I love that Yui's like sharing his happy moment with Ono. He's like, I did it, Ono. And Ono's like, that's so great. Freaking adorable. Their relationship's adorable. And you know what else is adorable? Asada being proud of Eijun. I love Sanada being like, I need to learn all I can from her. Sawamura is going to have a pack of first-year dogs following him by the end of this year. He's going to have Koshu following along like the wolf he is. Asada is going to be following along like... I feel like Asada would be a bloodhound. I don't know why. There's just something cumbersome about a bloodhound, but yet innocent. I feel like bloodhounds are like, they're cumbersome. They're not the fastest. They're not the most accurate, but they've got a good nose. They got a good intuition. And I feel like bloodhounds are just, they're not mean. And there's not a mean bone in a bloodhound's body. And I feel like that's Asada. Asada's a damn bloodhound. And they can be really good at doing what they do. So I'm like, Asada's got potential, right? I just feel like he's a bloodhound. And so, but he's proud and he wants to learn all he can from Ajun, just like Koshu. Makes sense. And so then, I don't know, there's something about Miyuki and Furuya moments that I really love. There's something about them. And Miyuki and Furuya somehow have the best moments because I think they're so similar. I think it's the same way I like the moments between Koshu and Sawamura that I like between Miyuki and Furuya. I don't ship Miyuki and Furuya, but I think that they're really good friends. And I think they connect to each other and relate to each other quite a lot. But I like that Miyuki and Furuya they're both quiet characters in private. And so I think they kind of have this moment walking together. And Furuya, he's communicating more. And he's grown comfortable enough around Miyuki to be like, what did you think about Sawamura's pitches? I think he says Ajun. I'm pretty sure he does. I'll have to go back and look. What did you think about them? And Miyuki's like, I thought they were too stiff and too driven. It's like, I thought they were bad. He's like, and the fact that Miyuki says, I wish he would calm down. I'm like, why don't you tell him that? I was like, I know he does, but I'm like, you need to just like grab Sawamura by the shoulders, be like, calm the fuck down, and then just go. But yeah, it's not Miyuki's style. But he says that he admires Sawamura's spirit and drive, and he likes how self-assertive Sawamura is. Miyuki's like, I don't gotta warm that boy up. He's never lukewarm. He's always going full throttle. And he's like, I can handle full throttle, right? It challenges Miyuki, and he likes it. And so he's like, I like how self-assertive Sawamura is, and I love that he tells Furuya, but now it's your turn. You get a chance to carry the baton on. You get to be self-assertive. He's like, you're questioning yourself, and what you should be doing is like, this is your chance. Like it's your turn to show just how good of a pitcher you are. And that inspires Furuya. I like that. I like that a lot. I like that Miyuki seems like he's able to inspire Furuya a lot genuinely, and I like that. It's a very good moment. So yeah, Kataoka asks to see Sawamura, and I did not know where this was going. I thought he was going to yell at Sawamura or tell him he was like banned from the next game for a reason, from the quarterfinals for a reason. But instead, he wants Sawamura and Koshu to go watch the back-to-back quarterfinal games for the other teams. And I think Kataoka realizes, as Miyuki has realized, that Sawamura, he is reflective, and he does think about these things and try to follow through with them. So Kataoka, I think this is a really smart decision. One, to go with Koshu, because Koshu will analyze everything and will be able to be like, okay, this is how this battery works, this is how this play works, this is how this play works, because he's really smart about that. I also think it's to appease Ochiai, because then he can tell Ochiai, okay, well then I'll send Koshu with Sawamura, and that will get them experience together, learning about other teams and bonding, so they can become a better battery. If that will work, it'll be like off the field training. But also because he wants Sawamura to see the pitchers for some of the top teams in the nation. Because at this point, we're at the top 8 teams for the quarterfinals. So he's like, if you go watch these games, you're going to see an amazing set of pitching. And he's, I'm sure, wanting Sawamura to be inspired by it, which he is. So there we go. So I was really happy about Koshu and Sawamura going on their adventure together to go see the games. But I was like, Chris said he was going to go see Sawamura in the quarterfinals. So does that mean Chris is going to show up and Sawamura's not going to pitch, and it's going to be like, oh, I wanted Sawamura to pitch for Chris to see. That just means that Sawamura has to pitch and Chris has to show up in the finals or the semifinals. Chris just has to show up for one of those games again so we can see Sawamura pitch. That's all I want to see. I want Sawamura and Chris to reconnect after all this time. And he's become the ace. Why? Like, just how dare you? How dare you, series? But yeah, nope. Sawamura accepts the duty. He's like, I'll do it. I love the like no falling asleep during the games. He's like, no. I love when he says like, I got a good sleep, and Ray and then we're like, good sleep? When did you sleep? It's like, why weren't you able to sleep before? So we cut to July 21st. Kosei praising Sawamura via text. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Kosei's just being like, he's so distant with me. I want to get closer. Maybe there's something there. I'm like, Kosei, what? Why? He's like, I want to get closer to Sawamura. I'm like, buddy. And Sawamura's just over his head. It's just not having it. But so he tries to get closer, and Kosei being like so bold, getting ready for the Sims on July 26th. I thought that was kind of bold of Kosei to be like, well, I'm taking the game off, but I'll want to be at full strength when I face you in the Sims. And it's like, oh, okay. Kosei not pitching is not surprising because he's kind of like Furuya. He can fizzle out pretty quickly, and I'm sure that the coach is like, we'll be fine. Just have Kosei on the sides. And plus, for Ichidai Third, that's motivation for their team, being like, look, we want Kosei to pitch in the next game. Don't muck this up, right? It's kind of like what is between Sawamura and Furuya right now. They're like, we are going to keep each other going by swapping off these games to pitch at to keep us both inspired. But yeah, Kosei just wants to be closer to Sawamura. And so he tells Sawamura, I think it's funny that both Sawamura and Kosei are off the quarterfinal game. Neither of them are competing. But Kosei has to sit in the dugout regardless, right? And Kosei, what does he say? He never thought that they would not make the Sims. That's the thing. I'm like trying to read my horrible handwriting. But Kosei, I find it, Sawamura being like, wow, he thinks they're going to make the Sims, like, no question. Yeah. And then Kosei's like, wait, I hadn't thought about if we lost. I love Kosei's like, I didn't think we'd ever lose. That is very much like Mei personality. That personality is like Mei's. And so I'm waiting now for Sato to get to that point. Because Mei was like, oh, we're not losing. We're in Inashiro. We're going to the finals. Like, there's no chance we're losing. And Kosei basically was like, oh, we're making the Sims at least. We're not losing. So Kosei and Mei have a similar personality about it. And I want Sawamura, but Sawamura's not cocky. So that may not happen. It may not get to the point, it may get to the point where Sawamura is like, we're going to win because we're Sato. And believe it. And the team be like, oh. I want, if that happens, I want like a shot to Miyuki to be like, what is this? So, Sensen, they are putting all their trust in Maki. Seiko, they have the buff batters. That I love that Masu, the salty captain of Seiko, calls a bunch of shirtless morons. They're imbeciles. I love Masu. He's a salty little guy, and he's so much fun. He's like, he's not shirtless. And God, I love that Masu's just like, you guys are morons, put your shirts back on, let's get to work. Like, I do like Masu as a character a lot. He deserved a better team. Not that I don't like him and Nagata together. I feel like, here's the thing, Masu and Nagata have a very Umamiya Now vibe to them. Like, Masu and Now have similar vibes, except Now is on like a competent team that doesn't drive him crazy. And Masu's stuck with Seiko, who are shirtless morons. So I feel like if Masu was allowed to be like the coach of Ugamori, he'd probably be in heaven. He'd be like, we're great. But he deals with like, he has Umamiya to like be there to chide him on, just like Now has Umamiya, just like Masu has Nagata. It's like, okay. It's funny, you have these three teams. You have Umamiya and Now for Ugamori. You have Nagata and Masu for Seiko, and then you have Sanada and Raichi for Yakushi. And you kind of interchange some of the characters. Like Nagata and Raichi are both like the power batters, and Sanada and Umamiya are like the pitchers, and then Now and Masu are like the captains. So you have Yakushi, Ugamori, and Seiko that you could all kind of swap players and their roles at, and it would all kind of work out similarly, which is pretty interesting, right? But okay, Nagata's got an obsession with Mei, and we'll talk about the whole game here in a minute, but Nagata has this obsession with Mei. And there's a moment where Mei's like squeezing his biceps. Straight men out there in the comments section, do you ever squeeze your opponent's biceps at training camps? Do you compliment them on their biceps and squeeze them? If you do, please comment down below. If you are not heterosexual and you do that, please comment down below. I'm just like, Mei, I'm sure, is gay. I'm like, there is no rational explanation for Mei being the way that he is. I'm like, I'm sorry, no, he's not. Mei is not taking any of the girls' confessions he receives and running with them. No, he's kindly turning them down and waiting to be on the same team as Harada. Let's be real. That just got me. But he wants to bat against Mei. Nagata does, just like Raichi. He is very much like Nagata wanting to bat against a good pitcher. Very similar to Raichi. Should have been foreshadowing that they were going to lose. Should have been foreshadowing at this point. But Jin, he's the coach. He complains about them stripping. I'm glad he's not on board with it. And then Ogawa. I forgot about him. I was like, oh, you're the guy that charged into Miyuki recklessly. Wow. And he was like, if the connection to Raichi from Nagata wasn't red flag number 1, the major red flag was Ogawa being the pitcher. Not even the ace pitcher. He's number 10. But I was like, oh, because Ogawa, you know, these guys from Seiko's team are like batting crazy. They're like buff. They're getting all hot and sweaty out there. Ogawa's eating like a bag of chips. And Masu gets onto him and he's like, you're being lazy? You're not doing anything? You need to go on a fucking diet? Like, I love that translation. He's like, you need to trim the fuck down. It's like, I'm like, oh my God, Ogawa. But yeah, he's not shirtless. He was looking very complacent, right? And Masu says later that he didn't practice like he should have. He got lazy. He was stagnant. He didn't try to help the team out. He basically just didn't do his job, and that contributed to them losing. It's like, oh my gosh, okay. So yeah, we go to July 22nd, Inashiro versus Seiko, and they make a point of saying that Seiko's batting average was .455, which is pretty high, but May makes it look like nothing, and they're at 0-6. Like 0-6, like near the 8th inning, and May ends up shutting them down 10-0 in the 8th. It's like, what the heck? And the quick game was called. On the one hand, I'm kind of like torn, because on the one hand, Terajima's wasting no time. He's like, we knew from back last volume when they announced Inashiro versus Seiko, I think I said in the discussion, I was like, oh, they're not going to win. It's like, so I think on the one hand, Terajima, I am a little sad that we rushed through that game, because I did want to see more with Masu, and I wanted to see more with maybe Ogawa, and I wanted to see more with Nagata and his whole thing against May. I wanted to see more of that matchup, so I am a little sad that we didn't spend more time on it. But on the other hand, I'm glad Terajima was like, I'm not wasting your time. We're going to get to some more important matches. And maybe Terajima just didn't know a fun, creative way to make the game go without either retreading waters we've already tread. Because Seiko's just a very basic team on the surface. There's no big tragic backstory with the characters. We've already got Ogawa's backstory from back when he faced Sato. We've already covered those bases. Haha, pun intended. But there's not really any new ground to cover with that team, except they're like for humorous effect, right? So because of that, I feel like you really don't have anywhere to go with them. So Terajima's like, why do I waste time trying to think of a backstory for these characters when we can just go ahead and show Inashiro winning and establish the dominance of May? Because that's really what it was. It was about May getting Nagata on the 3-1 strikeout. And here's the thing. That 3-run strikeout was a parallel of Amihisa with Raichi. May striking out Nagata 3 times out of 4 was just like Amihisa against Raichi 3 times out of 4. It's just the 4th time with Raichi scored runs, and the 1 time with Nagata did not do anything. So there's your difference. But yeah, Nagata, I get the idea that Nagata is probably going to go pro. Maybe. I get the idea that maybe as a batter he'll go pro, because they do that whole thing at the end. And May being surprisingly like, him being nice to Nagata, being like, hey, that was fun. Sorry you guys lost, but let's play again sometime. I was like, oh, May, I don't know if it was sarcasm and being mocking, but Nagata didn't take it as sarcasm. He thought it was real. He was like, oh, we could play again. Yeah. And he's like, let's play again. He's like, we could face May another time. So I'm like, maybe they both go pro and they end up facing each other professionally. That would be kind of cool. I would like that. And then Masu just lets into Ogawa being like, your laziness cost us the game. And like, just takes a whole page of just ranting at him for how bad he was. I was like, so part of me is like, I would have liked to have seen Seiko and Inashiro's game a little bit more in depth. But the other part of me is like, no, they were going to lose anyway. So why waste time? Let's get to the main event, shall we? So I'm a little torn on that, but I'm okay with it. As long as Terajima knows what he's doing, which I think he does, and just knew there wasn't going to be anything exciting out of that matchup that we haven't already seen before, then I'm okay with it. And plus, it was to make May, like I said, look really dominating in front of Sawamura and Koshu. And so May only wants to get better. And so this whole scene with Itsuki, let's talk about this scene with Itsuki. Because I was like, wait, what are we setting up? We're setting up something with Itsuki here. We're setting up stuff with Itsuki, okay? May only wants to get better, and he shows no weakness to his team at all. And Itsuki makes note of that. He's like, he never shows weakness. He's always assured. We've seen May weak, though. Before Itsuki came onto the team, we've seen May weak. We've seen him, like, break down in the dugout and, like, cry his eyes out. Like, we've seen May at that point, and it's terrifying. And so, but Itsuki has not seen that. So Itsuki doesn't know, all right? Because Harada, like, berates him, but Itsuki doesn't know, like, the May that we've seen. And so he's like, he shows no weakness to his team. And so, on the one hand, that's great, because that's, you know, that confidence and stuff gives your team confidence. Like, you're doing great, we can do great too. But on the other hand, now it's adding pressure to Itsuki being like, am I not doing my part? Why am I not, you know, so confident? Why am I freaked out? Should I be freaked out? Why am I freaked out? You know, so Itsuki has a moment where he has the pressure of the aces put onto him, which is kind of crazy, right? That note where he says the pins and dreams of so many are placed on that small back. I was like, such a backhanded compliment on that small, slender back of May's. We'll talk about that in a moment. Where Itsuki, he feels the aces pressure when May isn't. And so that's interesting, right? Because I feel like Harada didn't have that problem. Harada knew May, he could see through May and knew May was a diva. And he's like, yeah, May's really freaking good, but we know who he is. But for Itsuki, he's shouldering some of the pressure, being like, am I good enough? Am I going to be good enough to, like, let May shine at his brightest? That's why I think that May and Miyuki would not have been a good battery. I mean, we've talked about it at length, but May doesn't challenge any of his catchers. I mean, he does, but he doesn't challenge them in a way. He's just so perfect all the time, or he presents that illusion of perfection. And Miyuki would probably just get tired of it. He'd be like, come on, let's try something different. Maybe like, no. And then again, they'd fight for dominance. But in Itsuki's case, it's made Itsuki kind of have a complex where he's like, am I doing enough? I'm scared all the time, so should I not be because May isn't? And so I feel like one of two things, or both of these things, are going to happen down the road. At some point, Itsuki will probably have a revelation. May will probably have a heart-to-heart with him and a revelation on the mound. And then Itsuki will feel better and realize his place in the world, and then he'll do like a badass thing. Or Itsuki's going to be the reason that Inashiro loses. I'm just going to call it right now that there's like a little seed planted, and either it's going to go one of two ways, or maybe both ways. Or maybe that seed being planted will be May at some point, because May calls him a creep right now. He's like, why are you crying? Because he starts to tear up. He's like, why are you crying? And May assumes that he's crying because they won and they're happy tears. He's like, hey, we haven't reached to win the finals yet, so you can't cry yet. We still got a long ways to go. But he's actually crying because he feels like he's got all this pressure on him being around May. And so I feel like either May's going to catch on to that and give him like a pep talk at some point, and Itsuki's going to snap out of it and be okay, and it may still happen. But also that one shining, like May shining so brightly that Itsuki might make a mistake. And it might cost them. I just feel like this is foreshadowing for something down the road. I don't know what, but it just seems like that moment I was like, something's being set up. Terajima is setting something up in the air. It may not even happen for 100 more chapters, but something's happening. And I'm like, I'm on to you, Terajima. I'm on to you. So Sawamura sees how good May is at pitching. I feel like Sawamura has watched May obviously before, but now he understands May more because he's an ace. He gets May's attitude and how he approaches being an ace. He understands it even more now that he's in the same shoes. It's like, yes. I love it. I love it. And Koshu notices that Sawamura notices that about May. So Koshu, I'm curious to see because Koshu's roommates with Miyuki. I'm curious to see if Miyuki asks Koshu if he's like, so what did Sawamura think of May's pitching? And I'm just waiting for, he's like, what do you think of the X? You know, I'm just waiting for it to all come back, right? I'm waiting for Koshu to have that conversation with Miyuki. We shall see, though. But then, yeah, we have Sensen versus Ichidai Third. Carlos, like, standing off and shows him and Shirakawa and May watching the game. Shirakawa and Carlos, and they look like a boy band. They just look like, Carlos sitting there with his tight tank top, Shirakawa's looking emo, and Mei looks like the lead singer, the lead vocalist. So they all just look like a boy band together. Also, Mei, when he said that small backside, Itsuki did, Mei is a little guy. I think this series kind of points out that Mei is he's kind of the Haikyuu Hoshiumi equivalent, Mei is, right? He's the Hoshiumi equivalent. He's small in stature, but extremely powerful and terrifying. But he wears these big baggy shirts that are too big. I'm like, what, did you keep Harada's shirt? I know he didn't, but if I don't add a BL moment into this discussion, then I've not done my job. So, but Sensen starts out really good. They have a 2-0 lead, which is surprising against Ichidai Third. Got me a little nervous. But then, Kosei. I feel like Kosei's attitude is just, it changes on a day-to-day basis, but Kosei's all fired up because he thinks there might be a possibility that he faces Sawamura, his newfound bestie. And so he's in a really good mood. And him cheering his team on, it was so much like Sawamura. When he was like, nice pitch, Misakichi. I was like, Kosei being like kind and supportive and cheering his fellow players on? Like, what? That's very Sawamura-ish of you, Kosei. Our Sunshine Boy's rubbing off on you. Interesting. And the Sensen coach, I think, is correct. He's like, we need to stay aggressive. We're doing good. We're doing aggressive. Don't let them start to trip you up. Don't let them play mind games. Don't get defensive. Just be bold and go all out and we'll be fine. And he's great, but I always feel like Sensen coach, he's the one that like tries to order his players around and tell them what plays to make instead of letting them make their own plays. And that didn't help him in the past. And so he's like, don't go on the defense now. And Maki, I mean, his pitches have consistently been 145 kilometers per hour, which is pretty darn good, right? But the pressure of Ichidai Third starts to get to him. And him and the catcher too. The catcher too. If you notice the catcher in this last chapter, the catcher's getting like the sweat beads and the wide eyes and being like, I don't know, maybe we should be defensive. Like the catcher starts to falter. And so does Maki. They start to get defensive out of the pressure. And Ichidai takes advantage of it. And man, Ichidai's coach, we book in this volume with starting out with the Norikane coach being like, just simple is strength. And here Ichidai's coach saying simple is best. The 2 fingers. Every time. He's like, get him. Every time. I love that. It's like such a move now. It's like, yeah. I love that Ichidai's coach does that. And he has such fiery spirit. That one page where it's just him with the fingers, like it just gets, if you look at the pages, they just get closer and closer. With each page, he just gets closer and closer with the fingers and his eyes are just fiery. I want to see this animated so badly. So badly. But yeah, he's like, you boys are strong after all. I was like, I love it. And so then at the very end, they get past Maki and get 3 runs. 3 runs and turn the tables, making it 3-2. And Amahisa is happy as punch, pleased as punch. And Kosei and Sawamura are just looking like, damn. And I like this because, not Kosei, Koshu. But I like that Sawamura is seeing this too, just seeing how quickly the tides can turn in a game. Like one hit is all it takes to turn things around. And Nabe's with them too. I forgot that Nabe was coming with them too. Not surprised, but I like that Nabe is there as well. I was like, that's pretty darn cool. And I've talked for an hour. Surprising no one. This was a great volume. This was a very much a setup volume. There were some really good panels, some really good humor, lots of setup that I feel are going to be little developments that are going to pay off over time, because that's what the series is good at. The series is great at setting up little nuggets of things that will pay off over time. And you just have to be patient. That's the thing about Ace of Diamond. We've talked to a lot of people that just start watching these reactions or start getting into the series. And there's been a couple people in the Discord that's like, I'll start watching Ace of the Diamond. And I'm like, okay, it's a slow burn. It's a really slow burn. And, watching 4 to 5 episode chunks if you can, because it may seem like it's going slow, but it is such a thorough series that it will reward you if you are patient. If you are patient and you follow along with it and are kind to it, it will be kind to you back. I mean, it'll be kind to you to a point, and then Terjime is going to smack you in the face with some angst, but it's rewarding. And so this volume was very rewarding, I feel like, for Sawamura. And so, yeah, so the next game is going to be Sosei versus Sato. Furuya is going to pitch. I'm excited to see that. I'm excited to see Furuya pitch. I'm excited to see how the aftermath of them watching these games go down. But we still got to finish Ichidai's game and see if I like that in this volume, Terajima was like, you guys know Ichidai, you know Inashiro's going on to Sims. Just go ahead and get that out of the way. But I like that we, of course, leave on this cliffhanger to know, is Ichidai Third going to go to Sims or is it going to be Sensen? I would almost put money on Ichidai winning, but I'm the worst gambler, so I don't gamble. So I can't say for sure. But I want Ichidai Third to win because I like them. I think they're a much more compelling team than Sensen. I mean, Maki's cool, but he's like, him and the guy with glasses are like the only ones on Sensen's team I'm like, okay about. Everybody else I'm like, eh. Also in Norikane's game, some of the batters, as they were coming up, you couldn't see their faces. And I was like, that's one way to know the team is not going to win if you don't get distinct characteristics of its teammates' faces. It's not always a guarantee, but it's usually a red flag. So, in any case, I'm very curious to know what happens in the next volume. I hope you all are too. I hope you all enjoyed this reaction and discussion. But yeah, next volume we'll do chapters 202 to 210, volumes 23 of Ace of the Diamond Act 2. So, in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back very soon with more Ace of the Diamond. Bye.